airspace analysis.
And Federal Airways and Airspace assist you in making a determination whether or not a structure is an obstruction.
That's correct.
The final results of Federal Airways and Airspace process, it never differs from the FAA's determination of whether or not a structure is an obstruction.
No.
And nothing comes out of the analysis of Federal Airways and Airspace that informs your ultimate decision regarding whether or not an obstruction should be waived.
They provide information of whether a existing or proposed structure exceeds obstruction standards.
So their analysis addresses whether or not a structure is an obstruction.
Correct.
So I'd like to transition, now that we've talked about sort of that initial step, where you make a determination of whether a structure is actually an obstruction, to whether or not it presents a hazard to airspace. After you determine a structure constitutes an obstruction, you have to go forward and determine whether or not it presents a hazard.
That's incorrect.
So what is your analysis after you determine that a structure is an obstruction?
In the case of the power siding board, we, as part of our determination, identify the obstructions and whether or not those obstruction standards can be waived or the conditions necessary to modify the structure to eliminate the obstruction.
And you say, with respect to power siding board projects, what's that distinction you're making?
We issued determination to the Ohio Power Siding Board.
So with respect to non-power siding board projects, does ODOT make a determination whether or not a structure will present a hazard to airspace?
No, we issue either a permit with waiver to obstruction standards, or a denial of the permit.
So when you're issuing the permit, you also have to determine whether or not you will issue a waiver of the obstruction.
Correct.
So for Ohio Power Siding Board projects, you first determine whether or not it's an obstruction, correct?
Yes.
And then if it is an obstruction, you determine whether or not it will be waived.
Partially. We may also identify the conditions in which the structure should be modified to eliminate the obstruction.
So let me restate it. In Ohio Power Siding Board projects, you determine first whether or not it will be an obstruction, correct?
Correct.
Then you determine whether or not the obstruction can be waived, or whether or not there could be a modification to the structure that would address the obstruction,
That would eliminate the obstruction.
that would eliminate the obstruction.
Yes.
And how would the obstruction be eliminated?
Lowering the proposed structure or moving it.
So for example, in our case, how would the obstruction be eliminated?
Could you be more specific? There were, I think, 50 structures.
No, sure, I'll clarify as we move you go to page 10 of your testimony? Question 20. And the line 9, you included a statement regarding the decision being made based upon sound aeronautical principles. Do you see that?
Yes.
How do you define sound aeronautical principles?
Our statute and rules don't define sound aeronautical principles. So a number of things are taken into consideration.
When you say your statutes, what are you referring to?
The Ohio Revised Code.
Are you familiar with Ohio Revised Code 4561.341?
Yes, I am.
What is that statute?
That's a section of the revised code that summary references our determination to the Ohio Power Siting Board.
Then are you also familiar with Revised Code 4561.32?
Yes.
What is that statute?
Summary, it's the statute that requires us to issue a permit. I don't know it verbatim.
Your Honor, I'd like to provide a copy to the witness.
I'm
If there are
marking
going to be
one
more
down there.
questions.
I'm actually marking exhibit now.
Your Honor, may I ask a question? Sure. I take it from the court's earlier determination that there only may be one objector from the side. And during the testimony, I was thinking a little bit. My interest here is to defend Mr. Staines during his testimony, and not necessarily would have the same interests as my colleague, Ms. Baer. And in that vein, I would ask the court permission to object. She may choose not to object if it's not in her client's interest, and I would ask the ability to also have the right to object to any questions, that it wouldn't be limited only to her or me.
Your Honor, I think that's highly unusual. Usually we have one witness on the stand. Usually we have one person put forth the objections. I'm not concerned about which counsel they can choose, but I think there should be just one individual setting forth the objections. And I'm not clear on this statement with respect to there's differing interests between counsel for ODOT and counsel for staff. So I believe there should be one person making the objections for the witness.
Your Honor, I am not representing staff or anyone at the Power Siting Board or the Commission. I am here as Mr. Staines is an employee of the state of Ohio and the Transportation Department, and I am here to represent him. And any objections I would make would be solely in his interest to what would be an improper question that would otherwise be objectionable, but nothing to do with the interests of any other party in the case.
I understand.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? I'd like to have marked, for purposes of identification, a provision of the revised code, RC 4561.32, Department of Transportation to adopt rules and conduct studies and or investigations. I'm going to mark this as applicant exhibit 34.
Should be so, but.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, you have this first.
Mr. Staines, do you have applicant exhibit 34 in front of you?
Yes, I do.
And is it the revised code section we were just referring to?
Yes.
If you look at the last sentence of this provision, it indicates the rules shall also provide that the department shall base its decision on whether to grant a waiver on sound aeronautical principles as set out in FAA technical manuals as amended, including advisory circular 150/530-13, airport design standards 7400.2C, airspace procedures handbook, and U.S. terminal procedures handbook. Do you see that provision?
I do.
So this provision of the revised code, this specific section, indicates that waivers should be based upon sound aeronautical principles, correct?
Objection? The statute speaks for itself. He just read it into the record.
I'll sustain the objection.
And Mr. Staines, does ODOT, when they're determining whether or not they are using sound aeronautical principles, rely upon FAA technical manuals?
When issuing a permit, yes.
Do you not rely on FAA technical manuals when you are making a OPSB determination?
They're taken into consideration.
But you're not required to rely upon them?
No.
Are you required to rely upon them when you are issuing a permit?
Only a permit with a waiver.
So if you are issuing a permit and you want to make, you're making a determination whether or not you will, there will be a waiver, you're required to rely upon these manuals that are set forth in that sentence.
Objection. Calls for a legal conclusion. He is not testifying as an attorney.
Let's try it this way. Your normal course of processing applications, what is it that you rely upon?
Your Honor, when we process applications, 7460 data, we rely on any number of things. We take into consideration all of the FAA technical manuals, the FAA determination. We look at sound aeronautical principles can include how aircraft are moving through the airspace, other obstructions that come into play that exist, the existing condition or configuration of an airport, their future growth plans, or future potentially negative growth plans. All those are taken into consideration in making our decision on whether to grant a permit.
So when you are And to be clear, is it whether or not you take these into consideration when you're deciding whether or not you're going to issue a permit?
Yes.
Or do you take these into consideration when you're deciding whether or not you're going to issue a waiver?
A permit with waiver to obstruction standards.
So are you required to rely upon these technical manuals that are listed in this provision when you are issuing a permit?
Objection. We are not talking about a permit here. It is irrelevant. We're talking about a determination for the power siting board. We're going down a path that isn't relevant.
Your Honor, it's relevant to the extent that this provision presumably requires ODOT to rely upon these technical manuals to ultimately decide upon a waiver if that waiver is based on sound aeronautical principles. To the extent that ODOT makes a decision to, in permitting cases, to actually rely upon these technical manuals that are consistent with FAA standards, yet for OPSB cases decides that they will not rely upon these standards and apply a completely different arbitrary standard, I think it's relevant. And to the extent that the witness can just explain what he relies upon in permitting cases, or is required to rely upon in permitting cases, and explain what he's required to rely upon in OPSB cases, and then actually rely upon, I think those are facts that are relevant to what the process that took place here.
Your Honor, I would argue that he is talking about the permit under the statute that he is asking, which is irrelevant because we're not talking about a permit. In the statute that is relevant is 4561-341. And that is a different statute entirely.
And Your Honor, I think we have different legal positions on this provision, which we can argue in brief, but to the extent that the witness factually either relied upon these manuals or did not rely upon them in OPSB cases or in permitting cases, that's what I'm trying to explore, not whether or not his legal opinion when this provision applies.
I'll have a question.
Could you reread the question, please?
Question, okay, so are you required to rely upon these technical manuals that are listed in this provision when you are issuing a permit?
The answer is no.
And so for non-permit cases, power siting board cases, are you required to rely upon these technical manuals in deciding whether or not you're going to issue a waiver?
You're asking in Ohio power siting?
In Ohio power siting board cases.
Point of clarity, am I required, could you
Sure.
just repeat the question?
In Ohio power siting board cases, you have to make a determination whether or not an obstruction can be waived, correct?
Yes.
In making that determination whether or not there will be a waiver, are you required to rely upon any of these resources listed in the last sentence of applicant exhibit 34?
We're issuing a determination. We're not determining, as part of that determination, we're identifying the things that modifications necessary to remove the obstruction to the Ohio Power Siding Board. We're not approving anything.
Can I have my question reread?
Question, in making that determination whether or not there will be a waiver, are you required to rely upon any of these resources listed in the last sentence of applicant exhibit 34?
I don't have the last sentence of 34 in front of me.
Do you have an applicant exhibit 34 in front of you?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have 34, yes. The answer is no.
So in those circumstances where you determine that you will grant a waiver in Ohio Power Siding Board cases, if you're not relying on any of these resources,
Objection, mischaracterizing the witness's answer. He didn't say any.
I'll withdraw the question. So jumping to page 6 of your testimony.
What page, I'm sorry?
Page 6. And question 10 and answer 10, you make a reference to 4561.341. You see that there?
Yes.
And am I correct that that's the revised code provision that indicates that ODOT will, in Ohio Siding Board cases, make a recommendation to the Ohio Power Siding Board?
No.
What is 4561.341? That you referred to in your testimony?
It outlines that we issued determination to the Power Siding Board.
So this provision indicates that as opposed to you issuing permits, you will issue a determination to the Power Siding Board.
That's correct.
Your Honor, I'm marking as an exhibit revised code 4561.341, Office of Aviation to Review Application, which is referenced specifically in Mr. Staines' testimony on page 6. line 6. I'm marking that exhibit, applicant exhibit 35.
So, Mark?
Are you going to provide copies of that?
Yeah, I'm marking it right now. Do you have applicant exhibit 35 in front of you?
Yes.
And you've seen this provision in the revised code before?
Yes.
If you go down to the fourth line down, it indicates that, I'll just go ahead and read it to you, make sure we're on the same page. So pursuant to any consultation with the Power Siting Board regarding an application for certification under section 4906.3 or 4906.10 of the revised code, the Office of Aviation of the Division of Multimodal Planning and Programs of the Department of Transportation shall review the application to determine whether the facility constitutes or will constitute an obstruction to air navigation based on the rules adopted under section 4561.32 of the revised code. Are you aware if ODOT has adopted rules with respect to whether or not an obstruction constitute let me restate that. Are you aware if ODOT has established rules regarding whether or not a facility will constitute an obstruction to air navigation?
Yes.
And can you turn to page 5 of your testimony? You there?
Yes.
I mean, question and answer 8, specifically line 14, you referred to Ohio Administrative Code Rule 550:1-1005. Do you see that?
Yes.
Those are the rules that ODOT established to determine whether a facility constitutes or will constitute an obstruction to air navigation.
Yes.
So do you apply those rules and when you are making a determination or issuing a determination to the Ohio Power Siting Board?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm just going to mark this Ohio Administrative Code provision as an exhibit as well, and I'll provide copies to the parties. I'm going to mark Ohio Administrative Code 5501:1-1005, standards for determining obstructions in navigable airspace as applicant exhibit 36